If you thought week 1 was crazy, how about that week 2 in NFL Survivor Pools? If you're with me right now, you probably survived yours. I did mine. We're going to get at it once again with the best analysis in the entire industry when it comes to Survivor Pools. It's Scratching and Surviving next. Congratulations if you are with me. That means you probably survived your week in Survivor, which not many were able to do. As much as I like to think this show is the best out there, if you're not in a Survivor pool, the odds are pretty good you're not watching this. But if you are, I super appreciate that. And make sure you guys are subscribed and like these videos. Of course, comment down below with your questions. I love answering them all, seeing from you guys. I hear a lot from the same guys each and every year, and girls. So keep those comments coming. Keep your questions coming. And hopefully we can keep you alive in your pool long enough to get that cash. I had Houston last week in Circa. Circa is down to, I think it's about 3,800 out of, we started with over 14,000, I think 14,266, and we've got something like 3,800 left. So really, really cutting the pool down in a way that I've never seen Survivor pools get just demolished like they are this year. So we'll see. Maybe this is a week where things kind of normalize. It's going to be an interesting week, a tough week. First, before we jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about equity because now we're at a point where equity actually matters. If you're in the Circa pool, your equity is about $3,700 on your $1,000 entry. So you've already picked up 3.6, 3.7x on your entry. And as a matter of fact, there are websites out there. I write an article for Survivor Sweats where you could actually post your Circa entry on it's like a secondary market where you could sell shares of your entry. So equity does matter. You have to calculate the equity yourself and kind of figure out that's what the average equity would be, but what would your equity be in your pool? If you took a team like Washington last week, of course, you're going to have more equity than someone who, let's say, took one of the favorites, one of the big favorites that won. What's a big favorite that won last week that maybe not a lot of people had? I mean, Houston was a team that doesn't necessarily have a lot of future value, but it's a team that is a playoff team, and potentially people are going to look at Houston as a team that they may take a chance on a lot more than, let's say, a Washington would. But we had a lot of the big teams lose. San Francisco is considered to be one of the top teams in the league. You had Dallas, who was considered one of those top teams. They lost. The Colts, I want to get into the Colts here for a second because I had a lot of people messaging me about the Colts. Now, guys, those of you who have been with me for any more than just this season or even this season, I've mentioned it in our first episode, I really look at the point spread more than anything. A lot of you DM me, whether it was on Twitter at Statsational or if it was in our Discord here at the Sharp app or in the comments on the YouTube video, you guys were sending me DMs and messages asking me about Indianapolis. Do I think now that Love is not playing, I should take Indianapolis? And my question to everyone was, I really didn't want to answer that, as my answer was going to be obvious to maybe many of you, which is no, not at all, because that was a 2.5 point spread when we had all these touchdown-ish favorites to choose from. Why go that route? But I like to have you kind of think about it. So I always threw the question back at them as to why do you like Indianapolis? And inevitably the answer was always, well, the quarterback's not playing for Green Bay and Willis is terrible. That all may be true, but the line is going to dictate that. At a 2.5 point spread, that's all that really matters. So what the market was telling you is, they've only got a 58-ish% chance to win that game as opposed to these other teams that were 70+% chance to win. So I really want you guys to focus on the point spread more than anything. Stop trying to handicap the games. Stop trying to think who you think's going to win and try to analyze the game yourself. As much as you know about football, trust me, I know a lot about football. I bet professionally. I play DFS professionally. I don't try to handicap the games when it comes to Survivor. I'm going to let the market dictate that, and then I'm going to play a little game theory and look at where the ownership is and what weeks should I be taking a chance to go maybe against the market. So that's why last week we really thought Houston was a good play. It turned out in Circa, a lot more people, close to 25% of people had Houston. Now, one of the reasons for that is Circa tends to be a little bit sharper, meaning the entries in Circa are people who are a little bit more sophisticated with gambling. There's plenty of amateurs in there as well, but a lot of people there are a little bit smarter than maybe your home pool. But you guys have the leg up in that home pool, right? So you took Houston, which was really the sharpest play, I think, last week. And if you followed me, you took Houston in your pool, and there probably wasn't as many entries on Houston in your home pool as there were in Circa. Could have been. You might have a sharp pool, but part of that was not only that the pool was sharp, it was the fact that the Chargers were the other pick that I really was kind of in between on both. It was a week where I didn't really, not that I thought Baltimore was going to lose, but it really was a spot where we could save Baltimore for future weeks, and we've got almost as good an option in both the Chargers and Houston last week. But the difference was the Charger line kept moving down. Now, a lot of you, again, are just going to fade Carolina. That's your strategy. It's not really the way I do it, but I get it. So you went and faded Carolina. You didn't care what the line was, and you landed on the Chargers, which worked out, obviously. So I kind of, when I saw the numbers, I wished I was on the Chargers, because the Chargers wound up being the team that I thought Houston was going to be in terms of how many picks were being taken, the pick percentage on them. But it worked out. We advanced. I think Houston probably a little bit better team than the Chargers, but perhaps, as we analyzed last week, we may not need either one of those teams as we go along. So let's jump into this week. I've got Survivor Grid up as I usually do, and we see that the team that is right now favored by the most is Cincinnati at Washington. The second most favorite here is San Francisco at the Rams. Rams decimated by injuries. No Kupp, no Nakua, and the offensive line just playing terrible. They got demolished here by Arizona, as you know, last week. And some people did have the Rams in Circa as well, so knocked out a few people there. So it's an odd week where we're early in the season. Almost all the teams are available to everybody. Yet the two teams that are being that have the best probability to win are not being taken at a very high percentage. And if you look at these weeks upcoming, that's the reason why. San Francisco has one of the best future values out there, and then they've got near-term future values. So you see they're going to be projected right now 9.5-point favorites. I always say projected. It's actually a market right now. You can play. You go to, let's say you have a DraftKings account. You can go to week 4 and actually place a bet at minus 9.5 on San Francisco home to New England. So that's going to be a popular pick in week 4. Cincinnati as well at Carolina. Now we've got a quarterback change at Carolina. I believe I checked that line on the future, if it is still 7 next week, and we'll see. I'm going to look it up right now in week 4 if that line is still 7. But you see that then San Francisco in week 5, as I look this up for Cincinnati. And yes, that is a 7-point line right now that you could get. So even with Andy Dalton at Carolina, we're going to see how Andy Dalton plays. If they look really good this week, of course, that line's going to drop. But as of right now, we're looking at Cincinnati as a potential pick in week 4, as well as this week. San Francisco, you could take them in week 4 or week 5. Right, Cincinnati, then week 6 at the Giants. Giants would look pretty bad. That could be a potential option. Week 9 for Vegas at home. Right, you've got San Francisco home for Dallas. A lot of people are going to shy away from that game unless Dallas just looks as bad as they did last week as we continue. At Tampa, Tampa's look pretty good, so maybe not a spot that we want to take them in. Again, week 10's a long way off. Home against Seattle, probably be a pretty decent favorite there. They are right now. And then there's going to be some other options as the season goes on. So a lot of people are going to kind of hold on to San Francisco. And in smaller pools, perhaps you want to take a chance. San Francisco, you've got 10 or less people. It could be a really good opportunity to take San Francisco. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. But one of the teams being taken the most this week is Tampa. Why? Because after this game with Denver, minus 6.5, when else are we going to take them? They've got Philly at home, at Atlanta, at New Orleans, Baltimore at home, Atlanta at home, at Kansas City, home for San Francisco. They're at the Giants, at Carolina. So maybe Tampa at Carolina, but that's week 13. Home for Vegas, potentially. So we're really not looking at them until we get to week 13 as a potential team to pick. So that's why they're being taken in quite a few pools. Certainly going to be a strong option if you are in any type of pool. In a small pool, you could take Tampa. I like to take, I always say take the chalkiest pick in small pools, but when we look at it, let's say we take Tampa here. The chalkiest pick would really be the line that we're looking to take for the next 3 weeks. If we took Tampa and then we took, let's say, the Jets or Cincinnati, and then we took San Francisco. Now, interesting, as I'm looking at this, if you passed on Cincinnati, or if you take Cincinnati, should I say, this week, if we take Cincinnati here in a small pool, right? A pool, a small pool like 20 or less, 10 or less people, we don't expect it to go very deep. I'm not going to really worry about week 9 in a small pool, right? So that's why we get a little chalkier in small pools. If I'm in that small pool here, so maybe I pass on San Francisco this week. If I took Cincinnati, okay, I took Cincinnati this week. They are 7.5-point favorites, about 75% chance to win. And then in week 4, I go ahead and take the Jets. That leaves me San Francisco for week 5. So that's not a bad way to go. Now, you've got Kansas City here available in week 5. But I kind of like this. I like that route here if you go Cincinnati and then Cincinnati home for Washington, the Jets at home for Denver, and then San Francisco at home for Arizona. Now, if you don't like that route, they are actually a 9.5-point favorite right now, San Francisco. Maybe San Francisco banged up a little bit. Maybe they're not going to be as good. Arizona looked phenomenal last week. So, again, it's always hard to go too far out into the future. But right now, that could be a line. That could be like your best line. So maybe not taking the team that has the highest percentage, although as of right now, Cincinnati is that team with the highest percentage. You take that team this week. You take the team that's going to be the highest win percentage next week in the Jets, or, well, they'll be just under San Francisco, and then you're saving a little bit. You're going to lose a little bit as far as win percentage with the Jets, but then gain it the following week on San Francisco. So that's certainly a route you could take. Or if you go ahead and take, let's say you take San Francisco this week, right, you can then have your choice of the Jets or Cincinnati next week, and then you would go with Kansas City in week 5. I think all of those are viable options. Doing it with San Francisco this week, of course, you're getting a lot more leverage against the field here because San Francisco is not going to be taken by a lot of people in pools. This is something you're going to have to monitor. We're going to have to see how the lines move throughout the week. We saw that Charger line come down a little bit, which is what made Houston a more popular pick. You're going to have to make that call and, of course, leave your comments down below. As we come down the list here for this week and look at the win probabilities, we've talked about San Francisco, talked about Denver, talked about Tampa, who's home for Denver. You've got Cleveland at home for the Giants. They're catching almost 12% of entries right now. Interesting one here. Cleveland does not have a whole lot of future value. They're at Washington, not a game that we particularly love. Home against the Chargers, potentially. You don't really have too many chances there. So if you wanted in maybe a pool that you have, maybe a medium-sized pool, perhaps you'd want to go out and look at a Cleveland, kind of fade some of these other chalkier picks this week, or the picks that are being taken by a lot more people, and get yourself on a team like Cleveland. So I think there's just a lot of options that we could go with this week. The Jets are home against New England. A lot of people are just going to be scared of the fact that New England already beat Cincinnati this year. The Jets have not looked all that great. Even in that win last week, haven't looked great. But about a 70% chance to win their game. And then Denver, I think that's a better spot for them. They should be a larger favorite against Denver, but we will see, rookie quarterback there. And that will always be a tough for that defense. The Jet defense looked terrible in week 1. I think the Jet defense will be fine. And then possibly week 4 here against Denver, against that rookie quarterback, we may get a potential play. So a lot of options when we look at this week. Again, sorted here by the win percentage. We can go all the way down. You got Buffalo, which not a lot of people are looking at. Now, Vegas is the other team catching a lot of attention. Why? Because their future value is really non-existent. This is the least future value of all teams that you could potentially pick. In larger pools, it's going to be tough not to take a team like Vegas or Tampa, and you may want to take Vegas for the simple fact that they've got Cleveland at home, at Denver, Pittsburgh, at the Rams. I mean, basically anyone they play, they're just not going to be all that much better than most teams in the league as of right now. I know they had the big upset last week, but we just don't think this is one of the better teams in the league. Not going to be a lot of opportunities. If you're in a really large pool, it does make some sense to look at Vegas. The only reason you would get off of Vegas is maybe to get to Tampa in a large pool, or to get off of both of them because you're going to have close to 50%, if not more, entries on both of these teams. So it's a real difficult week, I think, to pick. So what we're going to have to do is let's hop into the spreadsheet, see what we've got. So at 0%, the spreadsheet is always going to be looking at the teams that are the biggest favorites. And as of right now, of course, the win probability is a little bit different on my sheet because I am using the Sharp app. I'm taking the implied probabilities. I like to look at Pinnacle and then take the midpoint and then do the implied probabilities from the midpoint on the game. So Cincinnati and Washington, I'm going to look at both of their lines, take the midpoint. That's what this is right here. That's the midpoint of the money lines, and then convert that into win probability. So right now, Cincinnati has the highest win probability with San Francisco second. We don't look at future value here at 0%, and those are going to be your top two options. Quick look at the threshold column. What this is going to tell us, and this is going to come into play more for pools where you're close to winning. You're in a small pool. A lot of people have been knocked out, which is going to be a lot more pools this week. Team like Tampa, if you want to fade Tampa, what it's saying here is you could take any team over 66.5%, and that would justify a fade of Tampa. And this week you have plenty of teams over 66% chance to win. You've got all of these teams right here: Cincinnati, San Fran, Tampa, Cleveland, the Jets, Buffalo. And I said Tampa is the team that we're looking to fade. Vegas and Seattle all over that threshold. But Vegas, another team when we look at, because of their high pick percentage, we could take teams over 63%, right? So it starts to bring in close to bringing in a team like Kansas City. Now, this doesn't take future value into account. So if we're not going to take future value into account, we're really focusing this on when we have less people in the pool, the smaller type of pools. But you can get some information from this as well for your larger pools, just to give you an idea. You're going to have to manually kind of adjust this in your mind for future value, right? So obviously Tampa, we would want to push this up. Maybe we're looking at something like 70%, 71% because of the lack of future value. Maybe we're going to add 5% here and then only consider these teams: Cincinnati, San Francisco, Cleveland, and the Jets. Like, maybe that's our thinking here, and I think that's about right. So I think if you are going to fade, you're going to fade. If you want to fade one of these two or both of these teams that are catching the most action, I think you've got to make a choice. Do I go really crazy and take like a San Francisco, and we saw that you're going to have a lot of opportunities to take them, and just get yourself super different this week and hope for another chaotic week and San Fran moves on? Do you get with a team like Cincinnati that's catching a little bit more pick percentage, or a team like Cleveland? I think before I took a team like Cleveland, I think I would get on Cincinnati, just a higher likelihood of winning. And there are some avenues where we could avoid having to take Cincinnati in the future. Let's look when we bounce this up to 25%. And now you're adding future value, weighting it at 25%. You're adding a little bit more in. And because that future value is not that great on Tampa, we see that the top two options now move from San Francisco and Cincinnati to Tampa and Cincinnati. All right. And then the fourth option is Vegas, as we talked about, just not a lot of future value. So when we jack it up to 100%, and this is something I'll look at more for Circa, because we still have, close to 4,000 entries in that pool. I've only got one entry. We've got to be, we still have to be in that risk-taking mode. And I want to talk about risk just for a second. There's a couple of different ways, right? We can deal with risk. And when do we want to be riskier? We want to be riskier when we have a very small chance of winning the pool. I still have a very small chance in Circa. Like I said, 1 in, let's say, 38, 3,900, whatever it is that's left in that pool. That's a long ways from winning. Even if you're 1 out of 20, you're not a favorite to win that pool. You still only have a 5% chance to win your pool. Much greater than me in my large pool here like Circa, right? But the more equity you have, let's say you had 100 entries in a pool that had 10,000 entries to start, and you have now lost 50% of your entries. You're down to 50, but the pool itself has lost 70% of its entries, and they're down to, let's say, 3,000. So you're 50 entries out of 3,000 now, as opposed to the 100 out of the 10,000. So you're in a better shape here than you were when you started. You've got more equity than you did when you started this pool. So now you can think about maybe being a little bit more conservative. Now you're going to be more and more conservative the higher your equity gets, potentially. And we'll get to some scenarios in the future where we may want to take some risk, and that's what that threshold column is all about. But I just want you to get you in that mindset of thinking about that. Now, when let's say you're in a situation where you had those 100 entries, you lost 90% of them, you're down to 10% or 10 entries, and the pool is down to 3,000 off of 10,000. So we still lost that 70% of the pool. We're at 10 entries. We've only got 10% of our entries left. We are now behind the sticks here. So we have less equity than we started with. We need to start taking more risk. Now, how can we take more risk? I think the first thing everyone thinks about when they want to take more risk is maybe taking a team that has a lesser chance to win. We're going to be a little contrarian, right? That could be the case. Or we could take an odd line like a San Francisco where not a lot of people are going to take them, where we do have an actual advantage over almost all the other picks as far as win percentage, but we're taking a pick and taking the risk in the future. So we're kind of bringing our risk forward, or we're actually, what we're doing is we're pushing our risk back, right? So we're diverting risk into the future, where most people in these pools are kind of accepting a little bit more risk now with the hopes of saving in the future. So we're going to do the opposite, get a little bit more risky perhaps in that case, because we've got to do something different here to get our equity back. We need to maybe take a San Francisco and then try to hope that we have another chaotic week, and then we'll increase our equity, right? Or if you're in that situation where you have 10 entries, maybe you take one team across the board. That would also be more risky, right? So typically if you had 100 entries, you're going to diversify a bit. But if you wanted to get more risk, you're going to go ahead and take the same team with that 10. If that same team was San Francisco, or even if you took one of the favorite or one of the teams that's being taken a lot, like a Tampa, and you took them with all 10 of your picks, you're still risking a lot more here than you would if you diversified, if you took half Tampa, half Vegas, something like that. So you got to put all your eggs in one basket. Now you just have to win that game, hope that some of these other favorites lose, and then you could pick up equity that way. But, of course, you're risking your entire pool on that one pick. So I think you have to just be a little bit more risky just in general, in gambling and anything. If the prize, as the prize becomes less and less potential to actually gain it, right? We have, in my case, maybe a 1 in 4,000 chance of winning that pool. Still a very slim chance that I'm going to hit that 14 million. I have to be a little bit more risky than I would in a pool that I'm in right now, which started with about 50 people. We're down to 12. I'm not going to take as much risk in that pool because I'm really close to being able to win it. I have a good chance, and I probably have just a slight edge over the average person in that pool, right? So I want them to make the great mistakes until I could get down to a point where I may want to hedge, and we'll talk about hedging as well in the future. So that's really what I wanted to get at with you guys here and stress this week. We want to talk about, just a lot of different options in the comments. You guys are going to have, this is going to be a tough week for me to answer your questions because I am still up in the air about who I'm going to take in my pool here with Circa. I've got a couple of options that I'm really looking at. Certainly Tampa would be one of those picks. Probably going to shy away from Vegas. I think right now I'm looking at Tampa. I could even potentially take a Cincinnati. One team I didn't talk about was Seattle, who pop up here as an option. A lot of you have taken Seattle in week one. If you haven't, that's a real interesting pick. That's a team that, let's take a look. If that line even moves up and they become a bigger favorite than Vegas is this week, it becomes even stronger a pick because a lot of people have taken Seattle. Not many can take them this week, and you have the opportunity to really gain leverage on the field without taking a Vegas, right? So if I was in that situation in a larger pool, I may consider Seattle. Before I took Vegas, I would probably consider the Seattle play because now I get the same, I'm really getting the same effect as taking Vegas. The future value on Seattle is not that great, but I get so much leverage over the field if Vegas were to lose. And if Vegas and Tampa were to lose, I mean, I'm in just a fabulous situation there. So I would strongly look at that if you did have Seattle available to you. One other thing, I'm getting a lot of questions on you guys with buyback type of pools. Now, it's already week 3. Some of you have buybacks for the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever the case may be. What you really need to be doing in those type of pools is not even worried about you're not worried about anything else. You're not worried about where everyone is picking. You're not trying to even win your game. You want to take the worst possible favorite you can. This week is an easy one. You would take Vegas here because they are probably the worst team that's favored this week. You would look at some of these other teams, though. Last week, Washington was a pick that I told people in buyback leagues to take because what you're really doing is just trying to give yourself a free week. Taking a Washington was a free week. You're never going to take them again. If you lost, you just buy back into the pool. Okay, it costs you another entry fee, but it's well worth it to get rid of that play as opposed to taking a Baltimore last week when you're in a buyback pool. Makes no sense. You lose with that pick, and now you have to buy back, and you can't take Baltimore again. So you really you want to look at it. If you've ever played poker in a rebuy type of poker tournament, you get super aggressive in rebuy poker tournaments until you can't rebuy again because you want to potentially build up a high chip total, right, by taking a lot of risk. And the worst thing that happens is you just rebuy and you start over again. So same concept here in survivor pools. All right, we have gone on way too long here. Remember, guys, give me a subscribe, give me a like if you are enjoying the content here. As always, good luck this week. I'm hoping to see you all next week scratching and surviving.